There's a rule buried in shoreline building codes that kills more waterfront cottage dreams than any bank ever will. It is not the cost of the land. It is not the price of lumber. It is a single number, a setback distance. And if you do not understand it before you buy your lot, you can end up owning a piece of waterfront property where you're legally not allowed to build anywhere near the water. Today, I'm going to show you how a handful of builders figure out a workaround, and it is called the Shared Courtyard Model. And by the end of this video, you will understand exactly how to design a 1,000 to 1,500 square foot cottage that fits inside shoreline rules while still feeling like it belongs on the water. Before we get into it, if you're the kind of person who dreams about a small home near a lake, a river, or the coast, hit subscribe right now, because I'm building an entire library of these design breakdowns, and you do not want to miss the ones coming after this. All right, let's get into it. Quick clarification before we go further, because this word does double duty in this video, and I do not want you getting confused halfway through. There are two separate things I'm talking about. The first is the general concept of shoreline setback rules, the buffer distance that almost every state and county in the country enforces near lakes, rivers, and coastlines. The second is an actual city, Shoreline, Washington, just north of Seattle, which happens to have some of the most specific and most useful small home regulations in the entire Pacific Northwest. I'm going to walk you through both because understanding the general rules is what protects you no matter where you're building, and understanding what the actual city of Shoreline has done with its zoning code gives you a real, working blueprint you can study even if you never build there. Every year, thousands of people fall in love with a piece of waterfront land. Picture a cozy cottage sitting 20 feet from the shoreline with a porch overlooking the water, and then find out that the local Shoreline Master Program will not let them build anywhere close to that spot. In Washington state, for example, cities like Bellevue require a 50-foot structure setback in shoreline residential zones, and that setback is measured from the water, not from your property line. In New York, the Adirondack Park Agency sets setbacks that range from 50 feet in hamlet areas all the way up to 100 feet in resource management zones, depending on how the land is classified. Minnesota's statewide shoreland rules go even further in some cases, capping accessory guest cottages at 700 square feet and 15 feet in height inside the setback zone. And on the coast, North Carolina's Coastal Area Management Act often pushes new construction back 75 feet from the normal high water line near estuarine shorelines. Here's the part that surprises people. These numbers are not universal. There is no single federal shoreline setback that applies everywhere. Every state, and often every county or city within that state, writes its own Shoreline Master Program, and those programs get updated constantly. Bellevue's Shoreline Code, for instance, was amended by city ordinance as recently as May of 2026. That means the rule that applied to the lot next door 5 years ago might not apply to your lot today. If you are designing a cottage for a shoreline property in 2026, the very first thing you do before you sketch a single wall is pull the current local Shoreline Master Program and confirm the actual setback distance for your exact zoning designation. I will show you exactly how the smart builders are solving this problem in a second. But first, seriously, tap that subscribe button, because next week I am breaking down a builder who got a waterfront cottage approved on a lot everyone else said was unbuildable. Now let's go back to that second meaning, because this is where it gets genuinely interesting for anyone designing small homes in 2026, whether or not you're anywhere near Puget Sound. The city of Shoreline rewrote its development code so that cottage housing and courtyard apartments are now built in, defined housing types with their own dedicated design standards, sitting inside Chapter 20.50 of the Shoreline Municipal Code, and that update traces back to Ordinance 1027 in 2025, with the code staying current through Ordinance 1052 as of February 2026. Here is what that actually means for design. The code requires an on-site pedestrian pathway at least 3 feet wide, connecting the primary entryway of every cottage to the sidewalk, the right-of-way, or the shared driveway. It requires a minimum amount of usable common outdoor space for the cluster, and it caps how much of that shared space can be plain lawn, no more than 60%, with the rest required to include real landscaping and usable features, not just grass. In plain language, the city is not just permitting cottage clusters. It is legally requiring them to be walkable and genuinely shared, not just a cluster of houses with a patch of grass thrown in the middle to check a box. On top of that, Shoreline zoning code allows up to 2 accessory dwelling units per residential lot, attached or detached, which is worth knowing if you're trying to combine a cottage housing project with additional rental or multi-generational units on the same site. If you're designing anywhere in Washington state, or honestly in any state that has followed Washington's lead on middle housing reform, this is close to a real-world template for what regulators now expect a small cottage cluster to look like on paper. So if you cannot build right on the water, and if cities are increasingly writing courtyard requirements directly into their zoning codes, how do you actually design a cottage that feels connected to a view you are not allowed to build next to? This is where the Shared Courtyard Model comes in, and it is quietly becoming one of the smartest moves in small home development in 2026. Here is a real-world example. In Colorado Springs, a builder called Stream Home Construction just got approval for a 14-unit community called Cottage Court on Costilla. Instead of 14 separate lots, each fighting for their own sliver of waterfront or view corridor, the homes are arranged around a single shared courtyard 45 feet wide. There are no private driveways cutting up the site. Parking is consolidated into one shared lot, and a mail kiosk serves the whole community. The homes themselves range from around 500 square foot one-bedroom units up to roughly 1,000 square foot two-bedroom, two-bathroom homes, priced between $270,000 and $340,000, with construction starting later this year and the first homes expected by late 2026 or early 2027. The City Planning Commission approved this project on June 10, 2026, and the layout, the pricing tiers, and the construction timeline all match Stream Home's own official project filings. Now here is why this model matters so much for shoreline property specifically. When you cluster cottages around a shared interior courtyard, instead of spreading them out along the water's edge, you can often keep every single structure outside the required setback line, while still giving every resident visual and physical access to the shared green space. And in a waterfront version of this model, that courtyard can be oriented so it opens toward the water view without a single roof line crossing into the protected buffer zone. You are not fighting the setback anymore. You are designing around it. And in some jurisdictions, this kind of clustered, shared amenity layout can also help you qualify for density bonuses or infill incentives that a row of individual waterfront lots never would. Let's talk about the actual cottage now, because a shared courtyard layout only works if the individual homes are designed well. At 1,000 to 1,500 square feet, you have enough room for a real one or two bedroom layout, and the design principles that make these cottages feel bigger than they are come down to 3 things: orientation, sightlines, and shared threshold space. Orientation first. In a courtyard cluster, you want the main living space and the largest windows facing the courtyard, not the street side. This does 2 things. It gives you a visual connection to the shared green space, and if the courtyard has any water view at all, that view gets pulled straight into your living room. The bedrooms and bathrooms go on the outer, quieter side of the cottage. Sightlines second. Because these lots are compact, the trick is designing so that when you walk in the front door, your eye travels all the way through the home to a window or door on the far wall. That single design move is what makes a 1,000 square foot cottage feel open instead of cramped. A lot of the compact modern builds hitting the market this year use a shotgun-style layout for exactly this reason. One continuous sight line from front to back. Shared threshold space third. This is the detail most people skip, and it is now, in cities like Shoreline, actually written into the code as a requirement rather than a nice extra. A small covered porch or stoop that faces the courtyard, connected to that mandatory 3-foot pedestrian pathway, give you a transition zone between your private cottage and the shared community space. It is where neighbors actually talk to each other, and it is what makes a cluster of small cottages feel like a real neighborhood instead of a parking lot with houses attached. For the footprint itself, a 1,000 to 1,500 square foot shoreline cottage in a courtyard layout typically breaks down like this: a combined kitchen and living area facing the courtyard, one primary bedroom with an attached bathroom, a second bedroom or flex office, a mudroom or entry closet near the shared parking side, and if your local shoreline code allows it, a small covered deck on the water-facing side that stays outside the setback line by using an open, unroofed structure, since many shoreline codes measure setbacks differently for open decks versus enclosed structures. Always confirm that distinction with your local planning department before you assume it applies to your lot. Let's talk about what this actually costs to build, because I want to give you honest numbers, not marketing numbers. Across the country in 2026, standard cottage construction runs somewhere between $125 and $300 per square foot, depending heavily on your region and finish level. A builder like Dunn & Stone out of the Houston market reports a portfolio average of $213 per square foot across their active 2026 projects, with their most efficient builds landing around $173 per square foot, and those numbers come straight from Dunn & Stone's own published 2026 project records. On the higher end, coastal markets, and anywhere with strict shoreline permitting requirements, stricter foundation engineering, and flood zone compliance will push you well past $300 per square foot, sometimes significantly higher once you add pilings, elevated foundations, or flood venting that shoreline and floodplain codes often require. For a 1,200 square foot cottage as a rough national midpoint, that puts you somewhere between $150,000 and $360,000 in raw construction cost, before land, permitting, and site work. But if you're building anywhere near the actual city of Shoreline, Washington, or anywhere in the greater Seattle market, do not anchor on that national midpoint. Puget Sound construction costs consistently sit at the top end of that national range and frequently exceed it. So a realistic expectation for a 1,200 square foot cottage in that market trends firmly toward the $360,000 side of the spectrum and beyond, not the middle. If you're watching this from the Pacific Northwest, plan your budget off the high end of the range, not the average, and you will not be caught off guard later. And permitting on shoreline property is its own separate expense everywhere, not just in Washington. Between the shoreline substantial development permit, environmental review, critical areas assessment, if there is a wetland or steep slope buffer involved, and engineering for any required setback variance, you should budget significantly more for soft costs than you would on a standard inland lot. Site preparation and utility hookups alone typically add another $17,000 to $65,000 on top of construction. And shoreline lots often land at the higher end of that range because of stormwater management requirements tied to protecting water quality near the shore. The courtyard model helps offset some of this. When Stream Home Construction designed Cottage Court on Costilla, sharing one parking area and one set of utility runs across 14 units instead of 14 separate driveways and utility trenches meaningfully reduced the site work cost per home. That is the real financial argument for the shared courtyard approach on shoreline property. You are not just solving a setback problem. You're also spreading your most expensive site costs across multiple households instead of absorbing them alone. Here is the detail that almost nobody thinks about until it is too late, and it is the reason I wanted to save it for the end of this video. Shoreline setback rules are not just about where you can put a building. In several jurisdictions, they also restrict vegetation removal, grading, and impervious surface coverage inside that buffer zone, which means even after you have designed a cottage that sits perfectly outside the setback line, your driveway, your patio, and sometimes even your landscaping choices inside that buffer are separately regulated. A shared courtyard model handles this beautifully, almost by accident, because the courtyard itself is usually landscaped as a shared green space rather than hardscape parking or private patios, which keeps impervious surface coverage low across the entire development and can actually make the shoreline permit review process smoother, not harder. And that is exactly what the actual city of Shoreline built into its code on purpose rather than by accident. By requiring real landscaping instead of sea of lawn, and by requiring a walkable pedestrian connection between every cottage and the shared space, the city is essentially pre-solving the impervious surface problem before a builder even applies for a permit. That is the model worth studying even if your project is nowhere near Washington State. When a city writes the shared courtyard requirement directly into its zoning code, instead of leaving it up to the builder's discretion, Permitting tends to move faster because you're no longer asking for an exception, you're simply following the plan the city already wrote for you. So if you're picturing that waterfront cottage right now, here is the honest takeaway. You're not designing one small house. You are designing a relationship between your cottage, your neighbors, and a shoreline buffer you do not get to touch. Get the courtyard orientation right. Get your setback confirmed with your actual local Shoreline Master Program before you draw a single wall. Price your build off the high end of the range. If you're anywhere near a coastal metro, and 1,000 to 1,500 square feet is genuinely enough to build something that feels like it belongs on the water, even when the rules say you cannot build on the water itself. If this changed how you're thinking about your waterfront lot, do me a favor and subscribe, because I have more of these real cost and real code breakdowns coming, and drop a comment telling me what state or region you are building in, because shoreline rules vary so much that I want to know what to cover next. I will see you in the next one.